Aloha Hawaii, this is Pokalainui and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. We are recording this program on the 11th day of August, Saturday, and the time now is 8 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. The name of the program is Hawaiian Potpourri. I am Pokalainui, your host. We have been talking in the earlier hour about this elective democracy or this representative democracy and whether or not this process is really the best process to hear your voices and get your voices incorporated into a political process. We look at the democratic elective process anchored into geography or residence, where you live, and so you cut up representative votes based on a place of residence, not necessarily where your real community may be. Community, in my view, is a matter of mindset, is a matter of consciousness. So your community may be a shared community with a high school you graduated from, or it may be with a civic club you belong to, or it may be with your church, or with a political organization, or many different ways of identifying community. And I'm suggesting that representative democracy really should be based on your community, which is not necessarily defined by your geography. And if you could have representatives or candidates who say, I want to represent this particular interest. So if I can get, let's say, 1,000 nominees or 1,000 people to sign nominating me for that position, then I deserve a place on the ballot, and others could vote. So people would not be limited just to their particular area that they live in terms of who they can vote for. But you can divide the vote, let's say 3 votes per individual for representative voices. And for, let's say, the city council, you have 1 vote or 2 votes or whatever it is. But at least you would have enough people to show an interest in supporting a particular candidate, and then giving the wider community an opportunity to vote on these interests that they represent, to have those voices represented in your political process. So these are some ideas I am saying at least we should take a look at, rather than following an ancient process for no other reason other than that's the way it had always been done. Now, another part of the conversation which really came about mostly in the second half of the last hour was, well, there is one particular interest that is somewhat different, and that is the national Hawaiian, or the Hawaiian national interest. And for that, there should be a place cut aside for it, so that there will be, I guess, a representative voice for that interest. In other countries, they have set-asides for, let's take Aotearoa, New Zealand. You have so many seats set aside for the indigenous people. You have the same situation in other places. Right now, I cannot recall precisely where. But that's another way of making sure that those voices are heard. However, in the discussion we had, it was not merely a voice of the Aboriginal or of the indigenous people or of the native Hawaiians here in Hawaii, but it was also a question of that nationalist interest. And so we questioned whether or not there was really a divide, an appropriate divide, between the koko, or the blood, as opposed to those with that national interest and who can commit themselves to that national interest. So we had a discussion around those issues, but it still leaves that broader question of how can we construct a more effective representative form of government than what we now have. I'm not closing those questions. Either one of those matters that you would like to call and share an opinion about, you're welcome to do so. Our telephone number here is 524-1080. Give me a call. We'll put you on the radio and see what you have to say about these matters. So the question then becomes of democracy. What really is a democracy? And do we have a democracy, or is it merely a representative democracy? And the difference being that normally in a democratic society, everyone has an opportunity to vote on every question that is to come up as a policy question. In a representative democracy, you have your representative expressing themselves on those policy questions, and they can vote. Now, what we're talking about is more in the legislative process and not the executive process. In the executive process, it's not to create policy. It's not supposed to be to create policy, but essentially to execute the policies created by your legislative process. And yet we know that whether it's a president or the governor or the mayor, they effectively create policies by not supporting or not applying a law that has already passed, but not awarding any funds to in one direction or another direction. And so in that way, you can create policies. Also by committing military forces to a particular area, you are actually creating policy, although it's not legislatively approved. So there's some haziness between those things. There are many other things to take a look at in a democratic society. We'll get further into that, but let's go to our telephone lines. Our telephone number is 524-1080. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Polka.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good show today. I wanted to kind of frame this discussion by looking at the transformative force that is currently underway, has been for the past decade, and to project what it might look like in 20 to 30 years from now, in terms of supporting a genuine and authentic participatory democracy of the people, by the people, for the people. And that is to look at harnessing technology and having the wherewithal. And corporations and stockholders are doing this now. They're looking at various policy recommendations and changes and having stockholders vote electronically. And I would think that it would be a revolutionary manifestation of true democracy if the city council was disbanded or modified in a unique way, so that any time policy or decision-making regarding allocation of funds that are available through the tax base, that the citizenry is empowered to make ongoing and regular voting on decisions, the same with the state legislature. And I think that is a doable possibility as we see the transformation in technology in our society. And I'll take your comment off the air, kind of leading in that direction.
Okay, thank you very much for your call. Aloha. Yep. And if you would like to call, our telephone number is 524-1080. My response to our last caller is that, yes, I believe that technology will provide the opportunity for that kind of decision making, so that you move it more towards a democratic system of voting rather than a representative style of voting where your delegate is to represent your voice. And oftentimes he will try to assess the majority of voices of the people he represents, and based on that he may cast his vote. So you really don't get to vote yourself. So in this use of technology, my concern is the following. I believe that in a democratic process, and I think, I forget who it was who once said, it is more important to hear the voices than to count votes. What he meant, I believe, is that it's, and I would rephrase it another way, it's just as important to hear the discussions, to engage in the debate, to be willing to express and to measure the pros and cons of the issues involved than merely to count votes. I believe the technology of being able to vote will be able to bring in your individual voices for that vote. But I am still bothered by technology which can hear the various voices in that debate, that discussion, so that people can see a broader perspective rather than a limited perspective. Technology as it now exists seems to have too much chatter, too much, let's say, spam mail. There's lack of adequate control of who can get on the airwaves, especially with Citizens United versus this other case, other party. And so you have the very, very rich who then begins to control the discussion and the advertising, and they overwhelm the highways, the communication highways, which has been happening in the more recent or in the current election that has been going on. And so it interferes with my expectation of what a democratic process is supposed to be. Now, there are, of course, ways in which we can continue with the development of technology to bring about greater equivalence among people so that we can hear voices. But because there's so many voices to be heard, what perhaps we need to do is then begin to group the voices into a particular interest and then have the parties debate. So, as to that caller's question, yes, I believe that technology can present the voices of the people in terms of their actual vote. My concern is a democracy is not only the vote to be taken, but the considerate, deliberative process that should precede such a vote. And even in the current democracy, we don't have all of that because there's cases of hiding environmental impact statements and not releasing to the general public more information. What are kinds of stuff that should be disclosed? And so you would have to have someone making judgment about Romney's tax returns as being relevant or not relevant, or his association with Bain Capital, is that really relevant to the issues before us or not? And you will have different people from different campaigns coming out with different assessments of what is and is not relevant. More in terms of what will persuade people to vote for or against a candidate as opposed to the appropriateness of consideration in that race. Especially when you deal with sex, or you deal with affairs that people have had. As far as I'm concerned, it's totally irrelevant, and yet it plays a primary aspect of campaign, and people make up their minds on those matters. So it's a little bit more complicated. I cannot give you a more definitive answer than my meandering around. But I think it's a very important question that you asked. Anyone else who would like to call, our telephone number is 524-1080. Some of the other things I think would be required for an improved process of democracy would be mass education, so that people are at least informed about what the process is. Right now, I think there's a difference in the levels of education in terms of voting and how to use your vote and how to listen to the propaganda that goes back and forth, the negative voting, the positive vote, the negative campaigns, the positive campaigns, and all that kind of stuff. And yet, while I advocate a higher level of political education or civic education, that in itself may be an expression of my own, quote, class, or my own, quote, interest or perspective to that question. The next one, and I recognize that we do have a caller, so I'll get to that call. But let me make just one more point or two more points. The second point is you need free speech. And this kind of free speech really needs to be free. So people can speak about things irrespective of, where it falls along the political spectrum. Of course, you have to have some controls so that you can protect against libel and slander and that kinds of stuff. But right now, they claim we have free speech, and yet you have so many arrests whenever you try to picket anyway, some major conferences in Honolulu and all that stuff. The society does not have the amount of free speech that is needed. You need Olelo television 10 times more than what we have. You need to saturate the market of the views of different people. And finally, equality of freedoms. The freedom to speak has to be more equal, not so that just the rich can buy up all of the time, but we need to provide all interests to have access to the public airways. Okay, let's go to our next caller. Telephone number is 524-1080. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Yeah, I was going to talk on a light note. I saw the BP for Romney.
Okay, he's elected. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, just the first
chosen.
impression. I looked at him and I say, "What's that kid from Disney doing there?" There's a program with one of the characters resembles the PP. So I think there's gonna be some little posters marking him. Like when you make fun of just to make on light side to make fun of. That's one thing they may make posters of him as one of the characters in Disney.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Aloha. And if you would like to call, our telephone number here is 524-1080. The reference of the last caller was to, what's his first name? John, is it? Ryan, R-Y-A-N. And he came out with a Ryan plan for budget in the, was it the Senate or the House? I believe it was the House. Anyway, he has been selected by Mitt Romney to be his running mate for as a vice president running mate. So anyone else who would like to call? Again, our telephone number is 524-1080. Another aspect that should be looked at is the size of government. Is government so large that it should be broken down into smaller units? And can the city council effectively represent the whole island of Oahu? Should more authority be given to the neighborhood boards? Some people would say, well, functionally, it's just not effectively functioning. Some of the neighborhood boards just don't meet. And the quality of decisions being made at the neighborhood board leaves a lot to be desired. Someone else could come back and say, sure, why should the quality be any better when they are merely advisory and most of their advice is not listened to by the city council? And so you can go back and forth. I believe that the levels of governance is appropriate, that you should have, for our situation, island councils or island, city, in this case, county councils or city council, representing islands or group of islands such as Maui and Molokai and and Kaho'olawe and Lanai being together. So I don't have any problems there, and with the size of government, I'm not all that bothered by the size of government. Anyway, those are my feelings with regards to restructuring of governmental methods, and of course it's just another one of those things that no one really pays attention to, but ideas have to be cast out if they ever will germinate, and so I cast out these ideas about taking a look at what real representative government can be, rather than just stepping into the tried and trite formulas that are not necessarily the most effective for us.
Pala pala anunu me ka paka